Hi and welcome to the fourth video in this surfboard series of 5, and thanks for sticking with me and this back and forward paint process that I have with this particular board. It's been an interesting one because in some ways I think I saw so much of a finished painting in my early layers, but I knew it was going to take me a little while to get there in terms of balance. There's so many areas that I love on these layers. There's so many colors that I love, and I've pretty much stuck to my original palette. It's got a lot more complex because there's so many more layers, and it's possibly been frustrating to watch because I do cover so much of it. And this does happen, and it's vulnerable. As I was saying in the end of the last video, it can be a very vulnerable thing for me to show you a live paint, because you can see where things go backward and forward. You can see where I maybe put something on there that doesn't look great. It's that you can see me taking my time at getting somewhere sometimes. I have a feeling, I know where I'm going, and that can be a process to get there. So I'm really grateful that you're sticking with me. I'm really grateful that you're interested to see how I get to these places. And I'm also aware of how important it is for me to show up and show you the process of how I paint and how it isn't perfect. I go through a lot, and I want to demystify that for you when you are in these middle stages, when you are trying to find the painting, and how frustrating it can be, and what a long process it can be. And that's okay. I'll tell you what, with painting these boards, I enjoy it so much. There isn't a moment of me painting this that I don't love. It can be this big question. Am I going to get there? At what point am I going to find that balance? I often find the boards are the most challenging in that way. The storytelling across a surface and a shape that a surfboard gives you is really requires you to show up and keep showing up and trusting that the story will come through. If you haven't painted on a different shape surface, even if you don't want to do it to sell, but it's part of your practice, as it is for me, I suggest you do it because it teaches you so much about when you go back to your usual rectangle or square shape or whatever you do. I find that the shape of this board can give me so many clues to the work that I create on canvas or on paper. So I never see it as a waste. Even when I look back, as I'm doing with you and doing this, talking to you about my process, and I see myself going through this back and forward, and I see myself painting over areas that I then come back to. I mean, I've put a lot of the pastel colors down to clear myself space for the story. And when I look back, I think, wow, I did do that a few times, and maybe I could have got there quicker. But, there is nothing to gain by thinking this way. I prefer to think that every bit of paint that is on this board needed to be there in order for the finished board to be there. And I have this board up in my studio, the finished board, and I love it. It is more than what is there for me because of what I know. What I know is there under all the layers. And that's something that I don't get unless I just follow the process. unless I follow the feeling of what's my next step. And that is something that I'd love you to know too, that I really think when I'm finished a paint session, I put the board up. I often stand it upright and I look at it for a few days. And that's where my critical brain comes in, and I think about what's there and what colors I love and where the balance is and what I might want to do in the next paint session, and where areas feel close. Mostly what I'm enjoying about it and what I want to do more of. But then when I start the paint session again, that all goes out of my mind and I paint from an intuitive place and from a feeling place. So that's where I can really let go of what was there and discover the new layers. And that means I paint over anything and everything to get to that final conclusion. That can be a very challenging thing. That's happened over many years of trusting that I'll get there if I just keep showing up. And even then, I do have paintings that never resolve. Fewer and fewer, but there's still ones that I almost use as practices because they've been going for so long. And, in a way, I think that that's really important too, having those paintings that teach you things rather than need to get anywhere. I'm loving that blue colour. And you would have seen me go back and forward with the blue. I know it's going to be on the board. I just need it to be in the right way, in the right balance, with the right marks that tell the story. I'm loving the way those blues all coincide, all blended together when I put them down together. Sometimes, because I've noticed also, and when I've been talking about this particular paint, I've noticed I've used a lot of pastel colours to create space, and probably a lot more than I usually do. And a lot of that can also be where you're at a particular time. I know I was doing quite a bit in between painting this board. I had quite a bit going on with different projects and different paintings and going away at different times. And so coming back and painting from a completely different space can be challenging too, because you're bringing a whole different host of story and emotion and complexity to a painting. And that can be very challenging too in resolving a piece. It's probably not my preferred way. If I start a painting, I like to have it up in the studio, and I tend to work more in the series. I don't like working just on one, but I tend to have them up there for a good couple of weeks and just be working on those. This particular project was in my studio while I was doing a lot of other things. And looking back at it, I think that is where a lot of the overlayers of light colours might come from. But in every layer I've painted on this, I can see the finished board. So there was a sense of it getting there almost a few times, and then me going backward to go forward with this one. That happens more on board than any other substrate for me. Although it probably happened a lot on canvas. Less so now, but definitely I had those challenges for many years. So I'm bringing in the creams and greens. Pinks, creams, bright pinks, greens, blues, all the colours that evoke the beach for me. And I think you can see that the shapes are starting to really, really form. There's been this feeling in me as I've been painting this board of stories, of little stories within a bigger story. And it's interesting that I've spoken to you about the my memories of childhood, but not just of childhood, of also my memories of the beach now. I live and I work very close to beaches, on the northern beaches in Sydney, and in holidays I travel to beaches. Beach is my happy place to be. So in a way to try and capture all of the memories that have been running through my head of childhood all the way through to today, and even thinking about when my kids were young and taking them to the beach, and that being a totally different than a surf beach where it was a bit safer, and to try and capture the complexity of all of that. My brain hasn't been trying to do it, but I can see that that's been happening in this board painting, because there was almost a push to, now that I'm looking at it, so this is not a mental process while I'm painting, but when I'm looking at it back on the paints, and this can be such a revealing thing when you do look back on a paint session, I can see that there's this desire for me to paint many stories into the one story that I have of what beach life, or living close to the beach, or living in Australia, or growing up in New Zealand, all of that to try and put it into a story is so many stories. There's so many chapters to be written, and obviously a painting won't do that, but to try and get a sense of the depth and history of that, I think is what I'm wanting to capture. And again, I'll say I'm wanting to capture it intuitively. This is not a process I have in my head. All I can feel at this stage when I'm painting is I want to pull out different bits. There's a desire to have lots of stuff happening within small pieces of the painting, and yet for the painting to be whole and complete and balanced. It's an interesting challenge. And it requires me to go back and forward between small little stories within the colours and within the sections, and working out, are those sections balancing? Are they speaking to each other? Because while I want them to individually stand out, they also have to tell a story in a way that someone looking at this I can direct them around the painting. And I do think of this all the time when I'm painting, is when I'm thinking of composition. So this isn't so much when I'm painting, but when I'm looking at a painting in between sessions, am I directing the viewer around the painting in the way that I want them to look at it? Am I giving them a doorway in? Is there something that captures their attention? And then when I've captured their attention, am I leading them around a painting so that they see it all, so that they're captivated to stay and look around and find it interesting enough to not just see from a distance and want to come closer, but to want to stay when they're closer and look at all the small complexity that is there, that I get through all the layers. I've moved on to a deeper blue now. As you can probably see at this point, I've lost a lot of the browns that I had in the early layers. And so I know I need depth as well. So at the moment, I'm bringing that back in by deepening the blue. And I do that by using that ultramarine blue that I had there and adding probably a little bits of the other blues that I had there, and also adding black into it. So it gets a lot darker and a lot more punchy. This is part of me balancing that blue. Where else do I need to put it in order for it to feel balanced across the painting? Does it feel good up there? Is that going to stay? I love experimenting and trying. So I've grabbed an oil pastel right now. I'm not sure that I'll use a lot of it, but it's a really gorgeous blue color that's already in the painting, and I'm bringing slightly different marks. So I did say before that I don't use too much oil pastels. I certainly don't use them on the early layers, particularly on the boards, because they do, it's just gives a quality that makes it a little bit difficult to paint over. But it does give a real vibrancy. And here's another one of my favorite oil pastel colors. It does give line work that is just quite different than the acrylic paints themselves. So this is coming to the close on the 4th video in this surfboard series. We have one final one to go, and then you'll see the board as it's finished. So I hope you'll stick with me. There's one more paint to go. I would love to hear your comments. I would love to hear if you've painted any surfboards and the challenges that you had. I would appreciate you subscribing to my channel and liking this video. Every little bit helps me and helps my channel grow and go to people that might appreciate the content. So I really appreciate you being here, and I'll see you as we get to the final composition and the final surfboard. I'll see you soon.